The moment I saw my husband kissing my best friend, the world didn't stop. That's what surprised me most. The kids were still laughing near the water. Somebody was flipping burgers. A radio somewhere was playing an old Eagles song. The lake sparkled under the afternoon sun exactly as it had every summer for the past 20 years. Everything looked normal, except my marriage had just ended. It was Saturday, June 22, 2024, at our annual family picnic at Lake Monroe outside Bloomington, Indiana. I'd walked behind the rental cabin looking for my daughter Emily. She was 16 and had disappeared with her cousins about 20 minutes earlier. I wasn't worried exactly, but mothers have a habit of checking on their kids even when they're old enough not to need it. The path behind the cabin curved toward a cluster of trees near the shoreline. That's where I saw them. Mark. And Jennifer. My husband and my best friend. His hands were on her waist. Her arms were around his neck. And they were kissing like two people who had forgotten the rest of the world existed. I froze. I couldn't breathe. For a second, I honestly thought I was looking at strangers. My brain refused to make sense of what my eyes were seeing. Mark was 51 years old. We'd been married 23 years. Jennifer had been my closest friend since Emily was in kindergarten. Our families spent holidays together. We attended each other's birthdays. We sat together at church. And now they were standing 20 yards from our picnic tables acting like teenagers sneaking around behind the gym. I took one step backward. A branch snapped under my shoe. They jumped apart instantly. Jennifer's eyes widened. Mark looked like somebody had punched him in the stomach. Neither of them spoke. Neither did I. Then I heard another voice behind me. "Well," a man said quietly. "Looks like you finally found them." I turned around. Steve, Jennifer's husband. He stood there holding a paper cup filled with iced tea. Completely calm. No anger. No panic. Nothing. I stared at him. Then I looked back at Mark and Jennifer. Then back at Steve. The entire scene felt insane. What? I finally managed. Steve took a sip of tea. I said, "You found them." Mark looked terrified. Jennifer looked ready to cry. Steve looked like he was discussing the weather. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Aren't you seeing this?" I asked. Steve nodded. "Oh, I've seen plenty." His answer confused me even more. I expected yelling. Maybe a fist fight. Maybe tears. Instead, he almost seemed relieved. Mark took a step forward. "Linda, I can explain." I laughed. Not because anything was funny. It was shock. Pure shock. "Please don't," I said. Jennifer wiped her eyes. "Linda? No." My voice came out stronger than I felt. "No, not right now." Steve set his drink on a nearby picnic bench. Then he looked directly at me. "Take a walk with me." I stared at him. "What?" 5 minutes. "I'm not leaving." "You need to." The certainty in his voice caught me off guard. Meanwhile, Mark looked like a man trapped in a burning building. For the first time all afternoon, Steve glanced toward his wife. "You two stay here." Jennifer looked stunned. Mark looked confused. Neither argued. Something about Steve's tone made people listen. I followed him toward the lake, mostly because my legs were moving before my brain caught up. We walked 50 yards before stopping near an empty fishing dock. The water slapped gently against the wood pilings. A pontoon boat drifted across the lake. For a minute, neither of us spoke. Then Steve sighed. "I've been waiting for this." I stared at him. "What are you talking about?" He folded his arms. "Linda, how long do you think they've been having an affair?" The word affair hit me harder than the kiss itself, because hearing it spoken out loud made it real. "I don't know." 18 months. I felt dizzy. 18 months. He nodded. "At least." I sat down heavily on the dock. The boards creaked beneath me. 18 months. Not weeks. Not months. A year and a half. Birthdays. Christmases. Family dinners. Vacations. All while they smiled across tables, pretending everything was normal. I pressed my hands against my face. Steve waited. Finally, I looked up. "You knew?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Almost a year." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "If you knew, why didn't you tell me?" His expression changed slightly. Not angry. Not defensive. Just tired. "Because I needed proof." "What proof?" "All of it." I shook my head. Nothing made sense anymore. The lake. The picnic. The marriage. My friendship. Everything suddenly felt fake. Steve sat beside me. Then he said something that made even less sense. "Don't confront them." I laughed again. A short, bitter laugh. "Are you serious?" "Completely. I just caught them kissing." "I know. I'm supposed to do nothing." "For 3 more days." I stared at him. 3 days. My life was falling apart and he wanted me to wait 3 days. "No." I stood immediately. "No chance." "Linda." "No." Anger finally broke through the shock. "I'm not playing games. It's not a game. Then what is it? Steve looked out across the water. When he spoke again, his voice was low. It's the ending. I frowned. What ending? He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, opened a folder, then turned the screen toward me. The first image was a hotel receipt. The second was a photograph. The third was a bank statement. My stomach dropped. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. Evidence, dates, places, transactions, names. Suddenly I understood. Steve hadn't spent a year grieving. He'd spent a year preparing. And whatever he was planning wasn't finished yet. I looked at him. For the first time I saw exhaustion behind his calm expression. Not weakness, not denial, patience. The kind that comes from carrying a secret too long. 3 days, he said quietly. What happens in 3 days? A small smile appeared. Not happy, not cruel, certain. Then everybody finds out. The sounds of the picnic drifted across the water behind us. Children laughing, music playing, families talking. Normal life. But as I sat there holding Steve's phone staring at evidence I never wanted to see, I knew nothing would ever be normal again. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes I saw Mark and Jennifer behind that cabin. Sunday morning felt unreal. Mark moved around our kitchen like nothing had happened. He poured coffee into his favorite Indianapolis Colts mug. He read part of the Sunday paper. He even asked if I wanted eggs. I stood at the sink staring out the window toward our backyard. The maple tree we'd planted when Emily was born swayed gently in the breeze. 23 years. 23 years reduced to this strange performance. No thanks, I said. Mark glanced at me. You okay? The question almost made me laugh. Instead I nodded. Just tired. That wasn't a lie. I was exhausted. But I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. Part of me hated Steve for convincing me to wait. The other part couldn't stop thinking about the evidence on his phone. If there was more to uncover, I needed to know. Around noon, Steve texted, "Can you meet tomorrow, Cracker Barrel, 11 a.m.? I stared at the message, then replied, "Okay." The next 24 hours felt endless. At work Monday morning, I sat behind the front desk at Bloomington Elementary, pretending to focus on attendance reports. Parents checked children in. Teachers stopped by for paperwork. The principal asked about next month's schedule. I smiled when necessary, answered questions, performed my job. Inside I felt hollow. At 10:45 I told my supervisor I had a doctor's appointment. Then I drove toward Interstate 69. The Cracker Barrel sat near the highway exit like it always had. Brown rocking chairs lined the front porch. Tourists wandered through the gift shop. Retirees drank coffee near the windows. Normal people living normal lives. I envied them. Steve was already seated when I arrived. He had a notebook in front of him, and a thick manila folder. Seeing that folder immediately made my stomach tighten. "Morning," he said. Neither of us smiled. I slid into the booth. A waitress poured coffee. Neither of us touched it. Finally, Steve pushed the folder across the table. "You should probably see this." I opened it. The first page was a hotel receipt from Indianapolis. The second was from Louisville. The third was from Nashville. There were dates spanning nearly 18 months. Receipts, reservations, credit card charges, photographs. My hands started shaking. Steve waited quietly while I looked through everything. Each page revealed another lie. A conference that never existed. A girls' weekend that wasn't a girls' weekend. A business trip that apparently involved my best friend. I felt sick. "How?" I asked. Steve rubbed his forehead. At first I noticed money. That got my attention. Money. What money? He reached for another stack of papers. Bank statements. Some belonged to him. Others belonged to accounts he had legally accessed during financial reviews. Then he pointed to several highlighted transactions. Jennifer had been moving money. Not huge amounts. A few $100s here. 1,000 there. Small enough to avoid attention. Large enough to add up. Then Steve handed me another page. My own savings account. I stared at it. "What is this?" "Look at the transfers." I looked closer. 3 transfers. Each several $1,000s. Each approved electronically. My chest tightened. I hadn't authorized them. At least not knowingly. Then I recognized the destination account. Mark's personal investment account. The one he supposedly used for retirement planning. "Oh my God." Steve nodded. "Keep going." I turned another page. And another. The pattern became obvious. Money had quietly disappeared for months, not enough to trigger alarms. Enough to build something. Something secret. I leaned back against the booth. I can't believe this. I couldn't either. The waitress arrived with coffee refills. Neither of us noticed. My entire marriage suddenly looked different. Every financial conversation. Every excuse. Every delayed purchase. Every discussion about retirement. Had all of it been manipulation? For several minutes neither of us spoke. Then Steve surprised me. He laughed. Not loudly. Just a short tired chuckle. I stared at him. What's funny? You'll hate this. I'm already having a terrible day. Fair point. For the first time since we'd met, he looked genuinely amused. You know how I found out? I shook my head. The answer wasn't what I expected. Monday Night Football. What? Last October. I blinked. Steve nodded. I'm serious. He took a sip of coffee. Jennifer bought a smartwatch. I still didn't understand. Okay. She accidentally connected it to our television. I frowned. What does that have to do with anything? Steve almost smiled. During a Colts game, her messages started popping up on the screen. For a second, I simply stared. Then, despite everything, I laughed. A real laugh. Small. Brief. But real. The absurdity was unbelievable. You found out because of football? Pretty much. What message? His smile disappeared. Miss you already? The humor vanished immediately. Right. Not funny. Not really. Still for a few seconds, the ridiculousness of technology exposing two cheating middle-aged adults almost made the situation feel less crushing. Almost. Then Steve opened another folder. This is the part you don't know. My stomach tightened again. What now? He slid a lease agreement across the table. I looked at the names. Mark Parker. Jennifer Collins. Joint tenants. Apartment complex. Indianapolis. Move-in date. September 7. I read it twice. Then a third time. The words wouldn't register. What is this? They signed it in April. The restaurant suddenly felt too warm. Too crowded. Too loud. They're moving in together. Steve nodded. After Labor Day. I stared at the lease. My heart pounded harder with every second. Not just an affair. Not just stolen money. Not just lies. They had an actual plan. A future. A timeline. An exit strategy. While I sat beside Mark every night watching television and discussing retirement, while Jennifer called me her sister, the apartment changed everything. Because affairs can end. People can make mistakes. People can confess. But signing a lease, planning a shared life, that required intention, preparation, commitment. The betrayal suddenly felt deeper than the kiss. Much deeper. I looked out the restaurant window. Cars moved along the interstate. Families traveled somewhere. Life continued. Yet my future had shifted completely. What do we do now? I asked quietly. Steve didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the highway, then back at me. We keep going. For the first time, I realized he wasn't driven by revenge alone. He wanted the truth documented. Every piece, every lie, every dollar, everything. And despite my anger, despite my heartbreak, despite the part of me that wanted to storm home and confront Mark immediately, I knew he was right. Because once I confronted them, the investigation would end. The lies would change. The evidence could disappear. The story could be rewritten. For now, the truth was still sitting quietly in folders and bank statements. Waiting. Just like Steve had been waiting. And for the first time since Lake Monroe, I began to understand why. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I was Linda Parker, school secretary, mother, neighbor, wife. I packed lunches, answered emails, paid bills, asked Mark whether he wanted grilled chicken or hamburgers for dinner. At night, I became somebody else. A woman collecting evidence against her own husband. Even now that sentence sounds strange. But that's exactly what happened. Steve and I met several times during those weeks. Never anywhere obvious, usually small diners or coffee shops where nobody paid attention. One afternoon we met at a Panera Bread in Greenwood. Another time at a diner outside Martinsville. The less familiar the location, the better. We reviewed documents, bank records, property records, retirement accounts, anything that might matter later. The more we learned, the worse it got. Mark hadn't just moved money. He'd borrowed against a small investment account without telling me. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to raise serious questions. Meanwhile, Jennifer had been doing similar things. Not illegal. Not necessarily. But definitely dishonest. Steve eventually hired an attorney. I hired one too. Walking into that law office was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The attorney's name was Rebecca Shaw, late 50s. Straightforward. No nonsense. She listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, she folded her hands. Linda, do you want a divorce? The question hit me harder than I expected. Because until that moment, everything had felt theoretical. An investigation. A discovery. A crisis. But divorce? That was permanent. Real. Final. I stared at the carpet. I don't know. Rebecca nodded. That's an honest answer. And it was. I was furious. Humiliated. Heartbroken. Yet some stubborn part of me still remembered the man I married. The young father who stayed awake, rocking a crying baby. The husband who drove through a snowstorm to help my mother after surgery. The man who used to leave notes in my lunchbox. I hated him. I loved him. Somehow both things were true. That confusion became my biggest obstacle. Not Mark. Not Jennifer. My own emotions. Several nights I nearly told him everything. One evening in particular stands out. It was a Thursday. Mark was sitting in his recliner watching a baseball game. The same recliner he'd owned for 15 years. The leather was cracked along one armrest. A bowl of popcorn sat beside him. Completely normal. Completely familiar. I stood in the doorway looking at him. And for one brief moment I wanted to forget everything. Just forget. Pretend. Stay married. Stay comfortable. Stay safe. Then his phone buzzed. He smiled at the screen. Not a huge smile. A tiny one. But I recognized it immediately. The smile people save for somebody special. My stomach turned. The fantasy disappeared. I went upstairs without saying a word. The next morning I called Steve. I almost told him. There was silence on the line. Then Steve sighed. Me too. That surprised me. Jennifer cried yesterday. I sat quietly. Did it work? No. His answer came immediately. No, it didn't. That conversation helped more than he probably realized. Because it reminded me that I wasn't the only person struggling. Neither of us wanted revenge because it was fun. Neither of us enjoyed this. We were simply dealing with reality. Unfortunately, reality started fighting back. About a week later, Mark became suspicious. Not completely suspicious. Just enough to make me nervous. It started with small questions. Where were you this afternoon? Who were you talking to? Why are you checking the bank account so often? Nothing dramatic, but enough to make my pulse jump every time. Then Jennifer apparently noticed changes too. Steve called me one evening. We've got a problem. My stomach dropped. What happened? Jennifer thinks something's off. Great. Just great. The closer we got to Labor Day, the more dangerous everything became. And then I made a mistake. A stupid mistake. The kind ordinary people make every day. Saturday morning I stopped by Rebecca's office. She gave me copies of several documents. Legal notes. Financial summaries. Nothing dramatic. I brought them home. Placed them on the kitchen counter. Then Emily called from upstairs asking for help with something. I walked away. And forgot the papers. 10 minutes later I returned to the kitchen. Mark was standing beside the counter. My heart nearly stopped. The folder sat right beside him. Open. I couldn't breathe. Had he seen it? Had everything just fallen apart? Mark looked up. What's this? My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I forced myself to stay calm. School paperwork. The lie sounded terrible. Absolutely terrible. Mark frowned, then shrugged. Oh, he handed me the folder. Just like that. No questions, no investigation, nothing. After he left the room I sat at the kitchen table shaking. I called Steve immediately. You won't believe what just happened. He believed it. Because similar things were happening to him. Pressure was building everywhere. The secrets were becoming harder to hide. Then another discovery made everything worse. Steve uncovered messages between Jennifer and several mutual friends. At first we thought they were harmless. Then we read them. I felt physically ill. Jennifer had been telling people I was emotionally unstable. Not directly. Subtly. Carefully. The kind of gossip designed to spread without looking malicious. Linda's been struggling lately. She's imagining problems. I worry about her. She's becoming paranoid. Every message was crafted to sound concerned. But the goal was obvious. If the truth ever surfaced, Jennifer wanted people questioning me before they questioned her. That betrayal hurt almost more than the affair. Because affairs involve selfishness. This required planning. Calculation. Cruelty. For 2 decades I'd defended her. Celebrated birthdays with her. Supported her during difficult times. And behind my back she was preparing a narrative that painted me as unstable. That night I sat on my back porch alone. The sun disappeared behind neighboring houses. Cicadas buzzed. Somebody nearby was mowing grass. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. Yet something inside me finally changed. Up until that point I was still mourning. Still hoping. Still questioning. Now I felt something different. Clarity. Not rage. Not hatred. Clarity. This wasn't about saving my marriage anymore. It wasn't even about exposing an affair. It was about protecting my dignity. Protecting the truth. Protecting myself. A few days later Steve called. His voice sounded steadier than I'd heard in weeks. Labor Day weekend. What about it? It's time. I sat upright. What do you mean? I have everything. Everything. The word hung in the air. Evidence. Documents. Messages. Financial records. All of it. Then Steve added one final sentence. The real show starts in 2 weeks. And for the first time I believed him. Labor Day weekend arrived with perfect Indiana weather. Clear skies, low humidity, 78 degrees. The kind of day people remember fondly years later. I almost didn't go. That's the truth. By Friday night my nerves were shredded. For weeks I'd been carrying secrets, collecting evidence, pretending everything was normal. I was tired. Not physically, emotionally. The thought of sitting in a room with Mark and Jennifer while knowing what was coming felt unbearable. Around 8 that evening Steve called. "You okay?" "No." "Me neither." For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he laughed softly. "We've come too far to quit now." I knew he was right. Saturday afternoon relatives began arriving at the Bloomington Community Center. The gathering wasn't unusual. Our extended families held events there several times a year. Birthday parties, anniversaries, retirement celebrations. The building sat near a city park with plenty of parking and a large meeting hall. By 3 o'clock nearly 40 people had arrived. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, children running between tables, people carrying crock-pots and desserts. The smell of barbecue filled the room. Normal. Everything looked completely normal. Mark arrived carrying a tray of baked beans. Jennifer walked in 20 minutes later with a peach cobbler. They smiled, talked, laughed, played their roles perfectly. Watching them was strangely fascinating. Neither knew what was waiting. Neither understood how much Steve had discovered. At one point Mark even kissed my cheek. I nearly flinched. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine." The lie came easily now. Months earlier I would have felt guilty. Not anymore. By 5 o'clock everyone was eating. Conversations bounced around the room. Football, retirement, grandchildren, politics, the usual subjects. I noticed Steve moving quietly through the crowd. Calm, focused, ready. Around 6 his brother Mike tapped a spoon against a glass. The familiar sound drew attention immediately. "Everybody," Mike announced. "Can we have your attention for a minute?" People slowly turned toward the front of the room. Conversations faded. Children settled down. The room grew quiet. Steve walked forward, holding a folder. My heart started pounding. This was it. Mark looked mildly confused. Jennifer looked curious. Neither appeared concerned. Yet, Steve stood near the microphone, took a slow breath, then smiled politely. "I appreciate everyone being here." A few people nodded. Others waited. The room remained relaxed. Nobody sensed the storm coming. Steve cleared his throat. "I've discovered something over the past year." That got attention. People exchanged glances. Steve continued. "Actually, I've discovered several things." Now Mark looked uncomfortable. "Only slightly. But I noticed." Jennifer noticed too. Steve opened the folder. "I discovered my wife has been having an affair." Silence. Complete silence. The room froze. For 1 second nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody spoke. Then chaos erupted. "What? Wait, are you serious?" Mark's face turned white. Jennifer looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Steve raised one hand. "Please, let me finish." Mark stood immediately. "Steve, this isn't the place." Steve ignored him. Instead, he held up several printed photographs. Large copies. Easy for everyone to see. Hotel security images. Parking lot photos. Restaurant photos. Date after date. Month after month. The evidence was impossible to misunderstand. Gasps spread through the room. Several relatives leaned forward. Others covered their mouths. Mark tried again. "Steve, stop." Steve calmly continued. "The affair began approximately 18 months ago." Jennifer looked ready to faint. Mark's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. Any escape. There wasn't one. Then Steve delivered the next blow. "The man involved is Linda's husband." The room exploded. People turned toward Mark, then toward me, then back toward Mark. A dozen conversations started simultaneously. Questions, shock, disbelief. One of Mark's cousins literally dropped a plate. The crash echoed across the hall. Mark finally stepped forward. "This is being taken out of context." Out of context. I almost laughed. Steve didn't. Instead, he held up hotel receipts, bank records, financial statements, apartment documents, one piece of evidence after another. Methodical, precise, relentless. Jennifer attempted to interrupt. "You're twisting things." Steve handed copies to several relatives. "Read them." Nobody argued after that. The documents spoke for themselves. Mark's shoulders slumped. For the first time I saw genuine panic. Not embarrassment. Panic. Then came the apartment lease. Steve displayed it for everyone. The names were clearly visible. Mark Parker. Jennifer Collins. Joint tenants. Move-in date. September 7th. A collective gasp swept through the room. Several people actually stood up. Because now it wasn't simply an affair. It was a planned future, a deliberate betrayal, years of deception. Then Steve reached into another folder. I have one more thing. Mark looked terrified. Jennifer whispered something under her breath. Steve pressed a button on his phone. A voice filled the speakers, Jennifer's voice. Clear as day. A voicemail. One neither she nor Mark apparently knew existed. The message left little room for interpretation. She discussed moving plans, money, the apartment, their future together. The room sat in stunned silence. When the recording ended, nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The truth had arrived. Completely. Finally. Then something unexpected happened. 82-year-old Aunt Carol stood up. Everybody knew Aunt Carol. Sweet woman. Church volunteer. Never raised her voice. She adjusted her glasses, looked directly at Mark and Jennifer, then asked, "So all those Saturday mornings volunteering at church weren't actually about church?" For 1 second nobody reacted. Then laughter erupted. Not joyful laughter. Disbelieving laughter. The kind that escapes when reality becomes absurd. Even I laughed. I couldn't help it. Mark looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. Jennifer burst into tears. The room had reached its breaking point. Within minutes they gathered their things. Nobody stopped them. Nobody defended them. Nobody followed. They walked out together. Past relatives, past friends, past people who once trusted them. The doors closed behind them, and they were gone. Just like that. The silence afterward felt strange, heavy, almost peaceful. Steve sat down, exhausted, completely exhausted. I walked over. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he looked up. "You okay?" I thought about the question. Really thought about it. Was I okay? Not entirely. My marriage was over. My best friendship was over. Parts of my life would never look the same again. But for the first time in months I wasn't carrying a secret. I wasn't questioning reality. I wasn't being lied to. The truth was finally standing in daylight. And somehow that felt like breathing again. People imagine that revenge ends with a dramatic moment. A confrontation. A confession. A public exposure. Then the credits roll. Real life doesn't work that way. The Labor Day gathering ended around 9 o'clock that evening. Relatives slowly packed leftovers into containers. Folding chairs were stacked. Children were rounded up and loaded into cars. People hugged me before leaving. Some offered sympathy. Others offered advice. A few simply squeezed my hand and said nothing. Those were usually the people who understood the most. When I finally got home that night, the house was empty. Mark hadn't come back. His closet still contained most of his clothes. His toothbrush still sat beside mine. But he wasn't there. I stood alone in the kitchen for a long time, just listening. The refrigerator humming, the clock ticking, the familiar sounds of a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Then I cried. Not because I regretted what happened. Not because I wanted him back. I cried because grief doesn't disappear just because justice arrives. 23 years doesn't vanish overnight. You still mourn the future you thought you had. The next few weeks were difficult, harder than many people realized. Friends often assume that once the cheater is exposed, the injured spouse automatically feels better. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you don't. Some mornings I woke up angry. Other mornings I felt relieved. A few mornings I simply felt tired. Rebecca, my attorney, helped me navigate the practical side. Property, accounts, documents, legal details. Nothing dramatic. Just the slow process of untangling a life. Meanwhile, news traveled fast through Bloomington. Much faster than I expected. Within days, people knew. Not everyone, but enough. The strange thing was that I stopped caring. For months I'd worried about appearances, what people would think, what rumors might spread. Now the truth was out. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The facts spoke for themselves. About 3 weeks after Labor Day, Emily and I went to lunch at a small restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, just burgers and iced tea. Halfway through the meal she looked at me and asked, "Mom, yeah, are you going to be okay?" I smiled. Not because I was okay. Not completely. But because she cared enough to ask. Eventually, she nodded, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That moment mattered more than any revenge ever could, because it reminded me what I still had. Family, respect, truth. Things Mark and Jennifer had sacrificed. October arrived. Then November. Life slowly settled into a new routine. I started volunteering at the Monroe County Public Library on Saturday mornings. At first it was simply a way to stay busy. Then I discovered I genuinely enjoyed it. I met people, made new friends, read more books than I had in years. Small changes, healthy changes. Meanwhile, Steve and I stayed in touch. People assumed we would start dating. We didn't, at least not then. Honestly, neither of us wanted that. We'd both spent enough time dealing with emotional chaos. What we built instead was friendship. The kind based on honesty. The kind that survives difficult things. Some evenings we'd meet for coffee and talk. Not about Jennifer. Not about Mark. About normal things. Sports. Books. Grandchildren. Life. And for the first time in a long time, normal felt good. Then reality caught up with Mark and Jennifer. Not immediately, but eventually. Because fantasy and reality rarely coexist for very long. Affairs thrive in secrecy. They thrive in stolen moments. Hotel rooms. Hidden messages. Private excitement. Real life is different. Real life includes bills, stress, laundry, arguments, responsibilities. Apparently their apartment in Indianapolis wasn't quite the paradise they imagined. I heard pieces of the story through mutual acquaintances. Money became an issue. Trust became an issue. Imagine that. Two people who built a relationship through deception suddenly struggled to trust each other. Shocking. Around February I learned they'd already separated several times. By April they were barely speaking. By June they were living apart. Exactly 1 year after the picnic at Lake Monroe I received a phone call. Mark. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But curiosity won. Hello? There was a long pause. Then his voice. Older somehow. Tired. Linda. What do you want? Another pause. Finally he sighed. Can we talk? I already knew where the conversation was going. People had warned me. Friends. Family. Even Rebecca. Still hearing it firsthand felt strange. Mark apologized. For the affair. For the lies. For the money. For everything. I listened quietly. Then he said the words I expected. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe he had. Maybe he hadn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. Then he admitted something else. Jennifer had left him. Apparently she'd started seeing someone new. The irony was almost unbelievable. The woman who helped destroy 2 marriages had eventually walked away from him too. For a moment I actually felt sorry for him. Not much. Just a little. Because consequences have a way of arriving eventually. And when they do, they're often lonelier than people expect. Do you think we could start over? He asked. I looked out my living room window. The same maple tree swayed in the summer breeze. 1 year older. 1 year stronger. Just like me. No. The answer came calmly. Without anger. Without hesitation. Without bitterness. Just certainty. Another long silence followed. Then he quietly said goodbye. And that was that. After the call ended, I sat alone for a while. Thinking. Reflecting. Understanding something I hadn't understood a year earlier. The best part of this story wasn't exposing Mark. It wasn't embarrassing Jennifer. It wasn't watching their plans collapse. The best part was realizing that their choices no longer controlled my future. That freedom mattered more than revenge ever could. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Trust can be broken in a single moment. But rebuilding yourself happens one ordinary day at a time. One choice. One step. One honest morning after another. And eventually those small steps carry you somewhere better than you imagined. If this story reminded you of your own journey, I hope it also reminds you that starting over is possible at any age. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if you'd like to hear another story, I'd be honored to share one with you.